Welcome occultists to another video. These stories may be triggering or graphic for some due to the subject matter. These are a collection of creepy, cold stories to listen to during the month of January. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe for more content. We'd always been drawn to the thrill of the unknown, the three of us. Growing up in a sleepy town where the most exciting event was the annual fall fair, we found our adventures in old stories and urban legends. That's how we ended up at the doorstep of the abandoned house on Willow Street. The house had been empty for as long as anyone could remember, its history a tapestry of rumors and whispered tales. Some said it was haunted, others claimed a family tragedy had locked its doors forever. To us, it was the perfect setting for a dare. I remember the day vividly. The sky was overcast, a blanket of gray that mirrored the decaying facade of the house. Its windows were boarded up, the garden overrun with wild weeds. It looked like a scene straight out of a horror movie. Alex, the unofficial leader of our trio, was the first to step forward. Always the bravest, or perhaps the most reckless, he pushed open the creaking gate with a sense of purpose. Sarah, his younger sister, followed closely, her camera in hand, ready to document our little adventure. I trailed behind, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. The front door was surprisingly unlocked, its hinges groaning in protest as we pushed it open. Inside, the house was shrouded in darkness, the air stale and cold. Our flashlight beams danced across the walls, revealing peeling wallpaper and a thick layer of dust on every surface. We explored the ground floor, our voices echoing in the empty space. The living room was filled with old furniture, draped in white sheets that looked like ghostly figures in the dim light. A grand piano sat in the corner, its keys yellowed with age. Alex pressed a key, the sound sharp and dissonant in the silence. We found the kitchen next, the table set as if waiting for a family dinner that never happened. Plates, still intact, were lined up neatly, their edges covered in dust. It was eerie, like stepping into a moment frozen in time. Our exploration led us to the staircase, its wood creaking ominously under our weight. Upstairs, the hallway was lined with closed doors. We opened each one, revealing bedrooms filled with personal belongings, a child's room with toys scattered on the floor, a sense of life interrupted. But it was the last room at the end of the hall that changed everything. The door was different, heavier, with a padlock hanging loosely from the latch. Our curiosity piqued, Alex broke the lock with a few strong kicks. The room was unlike any other in the house. The walls were covered in old newspapers, articles dating back decades, their headlines speaking of tragedies and disasters. In the center of the room was a single chair, facing a wall filled with photographs. We approached cautiously, our flashlights illuminating the faces in the photos. They were portraits, but their eyes were scratched out, black ink marring each face. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that the photos weren't just random images. They were of the previous owners of the house, their faces defaced in a twisted tribute. Sarah's camera clicked behind me, capturing the macabre scene. That's when we heard it, a faint, muffled sound, like someone sobbing. The sound was coming from the closet. Alex, driven by a mix of fear and determination, opened the door. Inside, huddled in the darkness, was a figure. We recoiled in shock. It was a woman, her clothes tattered, her eyes white with terror. She was alive, but barely, her body shaking with fear. Panic set in. We needed to get out, to get help. But as we turned to leave, the door to the room slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. We were trapped. The woman began to speak, her voice a hoarse whisper. She told us she had come to the house years ago, drawn by the same stories that had lured us in. But she had found something else, something evil that had kept her prisoner. As she spoke, the temperature in the room dropped, our breaths visible in the air. Shadows seemed to move on their own, creeping along the walls. Then, without warning, the photos began to fall from the wall, their frames shattering on the floor. The headlines on the newspapers started to change, their letters rearranging into a message that made my blood run cold: "You should not have come." We huddled together, our flashlight beams our only source of light in the growing darkness. The woman's sobs grew louder, filling the room with a sense of despair. That's when we saw it, a shadow, darker than the rest, moving across the wall. It wasn't human, its form shifting and twisting, a manifestation of the house's dark history. We were in a nightmare, a horror that defied explanation. The room felt like it was closing in on us, the air thick with dread. In a desperate attempt to escape, Alex threw a chair at the window, shattering the glass. The cold night air rushed in, a brief respite from the suffocating atmosphere of the room. We climbed through the broken window, the woman following, her movements weak and slow. We tumbled onto the overgrown lawn, the house looming over us like a malevolent entity. We ran, not stopping until we reached the safety of the street, the lights of the neighborhood a stark contrast to the darkness we had escaped. The police arrived soon after, but when they entered the house, they found nothing. The room with the newspapers and photographs was empty, as if we had imagined it all. The woman was gone, her existence a mystery. We told our story, but it was met with skepticism. The house was declared safe, its doors and windows sealed once again. But we knew the truth. We had seen the darkness that lived within those walls, felt its malevolent presence. I still pass by the house sometimes, its windows staring back like empty eyes. I wonder about the woman, about the secrets the house hides. But some mysteries are better left unsolved, some doors better left closed. That night changed us, left a mark that time can't erase. We had sought adventure, a thrill, but found a horror that transcended reality. The abandoned house on Maple Street remains, a silent sentinel guarding its dark secrets, a reminder of the night we dared to uncover its past. The moment my car hit the tree, my world turned into a blur of pain and confusion. I don't remember much after the crash, just fragments of lights and muffled voices. When I finally came to, I was lying in a hospital bed, my body aching in places I didn't even know could hurt. But something was wrong, very wrong. I tried to move, to sit up, but I couldn't. My wrists and ankles were tied to the bed. Panic surged through me as I tugged at the restraints, the cold metal biting into my skin. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing loudly in the sterile room. The hospital was eerily silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. I strained to hear any sign of life, any indication that I wasn't alone in this place. But there was nothing, just the sound of my own ragged breathing. I looked around, trying to make sense of my surroundings. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from a flickering fluorescent bulb overhead. The walls were bare, the paint peeling in places. It didn't look like any hospital room I'd ever seen. Time seemed to stretch, each second an eternity of fear and confusion. Then, the door creaked open, and a figure stepped in. It was a man, his face hidden in the shadows. He moved towards me, his footsteps slow and deliberate. "Where am I? What's happening?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't answer. He just stood there, watching me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. He was holding something, a syringe filled with a clear liquid. Panic turned to terror. "Please, don't," I begged, my body trembling. He ignored my pleas, injecting the liquid into my fore. A cold sensation spread through my veins, and my mind began to fog. I fought against the darkness creeping in, but it was no use. When I woke up, the man was gone, and I was still tied to the bed. My mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Was I being held captive? Was this some kind of sick experiment? I thought back to the crash, trying to remember any details that could help me understand. But it was like trying to grasp smoke, my memories elusive and fragmented. Hours passed, or at least I thought they did. Time was a fluid concept in this place, my only markers the occasional visits from the man. He never spoke, just injected me with the liquid and watched as I slipped into unconsciousness. I was growing weaker, my body and mind succumbing to the effects of the drug. Despair settled over me, a heavy blanket suffocating my hope. Then, during one of my lucid moments, I heard it, the faint sound of voices outside my door. I strained to listen, desperate for any clue, any sign of rescue. The door opened, and light flooded the room. Two people entered, their faces a blur. They spoke to me, but their words sounded distant, as if coming from underwater. I tried to respond, to tell them what was happening, but my tongue felt heavy, my thoughts scattered. They unfastened my restraints, their touch gentle but firm. As they led me out of the room, the reality of my situation began to sink in. The hospital was abandoned, the halls empty and decaying. The windows were boarded up, the outside world a distant memory. We walked through the corridors, my rescuers supporting me. They explained that they were urban explorers, drawn to the hospital by its reputation as a haunted site. They had found me by chance, hearing my faint cries for help. The outside air hit me like a wave, the sun bright and warm on my skin. I looked back at the hospital, its facade menacing in the daylight. The police arrived soon after, their questions a barrage I could barely process. They told me the hospital had been closed for years, a victim of budget cuts and neglect. As for the man, he was nowhere to be found, his identity a mystery. The police speculated that he was a former employee, someone who knew the hospital's layout and history. I was taken to a real hospital, my body and mind in need of healing. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive, that the drug in my system was a powerful sedative. The experience left scars, both physical and mental. I struggled to return to normal life, the memories of my captivity haunting my dreams. But the biggest shock came a few weeks later when the police contacted me. They had found the man, his identity finally revealed. He was a doctor, once respected and admired. But his life had unraveled, a series of personal tragedies driving him to madness. He had chosen me at random, his twisted mind seeing me as a subject for his experiments. The realization that I was just a pawn in his deranged game was a bitter pill to swallow. I was a survivor, but the randomness of my ordeal was a reminder of the fragility of life, of the darkness that can hide behind a mask of normalcy. I moved on, as people do, but the shadows of that abandoned hospital, of the man who had held me captive, stayed with me. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I find myself wondering about the other forgotten places, the other hidden monsters waiting in the dark. Owning a small restaurant in the heart of the city always had its challenges, but nothing prepared me for that chilling night. It was a typical busy evening at Savory Bites, my little culinary haven. As the night wore on, the hustle of the dinner rush faded, leaving behind the clatter of dishes and the lingering aroma of the day's specials. I'm Jason, the owner and head chef. That night, after the last of my staff had left, I was doing my final rounds, making sure everything was set for the next day. The clock on the wall showed it was just past midnight. The restaurant, usually buzzing with life, was eerily quiet, the only sound being the soft hum of the refrigerator. As I moved to the front to switch off the lights and lock up, I noticed something odd. There was a man sitting at a table in the back, his features obscured by a hoodie. Surprised, I approached him, thinking maybe he was a customer who had somehow been overlooked. "Excuse me, sir," I started, my voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "We're closed now. I'm afraid I have to ask you to leave." The man didn't respond. He just sat there, motionless. A sense of unease washed over me. "Sir?" I repeated, a bit more firmly this time. Suddenly, without warning, the man lunged at me. His movement was so swift, so unexpected, that I barely had time to react. I stumbled backward, tripping over a chair. My heart was pounding, adrenaline surging through my veins. The man was on me in an instant, his hands gripping my shirt, his face inches from mine. Under the hood, his eyes were wild, his expression one of unbridled rage. I could smell the stale scent of alcohol on his breath. I struggled, trying to push him off. But he was strong, his grip ironclad. In a panic, I managed to free one of my arms and swung it at him, hitting him squarely in the face. He reeled back, releasing his grip for just a moment. That moment was all I needed. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the door, my heart racing, my mind screaming for me to get out. I burst out onto the street, the cool night air hitting me like a splash of cold water. I didn't stop to look back. I just ran, my only thought to put as much distance between myself and the restaurant as possible. I spotted a group of people a few blocks down, likely late-night revelers heading home. Gasping for breath, I approached them, frantically explaining that there was a man in my restaurant, that he had attacked me. They looked at me with a mix of concern and confusion, but they agreed to help. We called the police, and a couple of them accompanied me back to the restaurant. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the door, the fear of what we might find inside gripping me. But the restaurant was empty. The mysterious man was gone, as if he had vanished into thin air. The only sign of the struggle was a knocked-over chair and my apron, lying on the floor where I had dropped it in the scuffle. The police arrived and took my statement, but there was little they could do. There were no witnesses, and the man had left no trace of his presence. They suggested it might have been a homeless person seeking shelter or someone under the influence who had wandered in before I locked up. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability, the sense that my safe haven had been violated. I found myself jumping at shadows, every unexpected sound sending a jolt of fear through me. The restaurant felt different, the atmosphere tainted by the memory of that night. I found myself hesitating every time I had to lock up, the fear of encountering the man again ever present in my mind. I considered closing down for a few days, but I didn't want to give in to the fear. I didn't want that one terrifying encounter to define my life, my dreams. But the incident left its mark on me. I installed new security measures, hired a night guard, and made sure I was never alone in the restaurant after hours. The customers and staff were none the wiser, but the shadows of that night lingered. I never saw the man again, never heard anything about him. He remained a ghost, a terrifying memory that haunted my quiet moments. I wondered who he was, what had driven him to such a state of desperation and anger. Sometimes, in the stillness of the night, I find myself thinking about him, about the randomness of the encounter. It's a stark reminder of the fragility of our lives, of the thin line between normalcy and chaos. Owning a restaurant had always been my dream, a passion that I had poured my heart into. But that night showed me a darker side of life, a side where dreams can quickly turn into nightmares. It's a lesson I carry with me, a reminder to always be aware, to never let my guard down. For in the shadows of the city, you never know what, or who, is lurking just around the corner.